or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be my April TBR. Every month when I pick my TBR, I use a game called Sorry Picks My TBR to pick my TBR. It's basically the board game Sorry. I go around the board, I pick 4 cards every month, and then I move around to prompts on the board. If I pull a Sorry card, then I have to pull another or read an extra book that month. So without further ado, let's jump into the prompts that Sorry picked for me. Okay, we're starting over here on romance, because that's where we left off last time. Move backwards 4. Series. The first prompt that I landed on was to read a book in a series, and for this I'm going to be reading The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, which is the second book in the, I don't know what the series is called actually, but it's the first book is Interview with a Vampire, which I read a couple years ago now, and it's also got a movie with Brad Pitt in it that I have seen numerous times. But it's essentially like historical fantasy horror with vampires. So book 2 is called The Vampire Lestat, which is told from the perspective of Lestat, who is one of the other vampires in book 1. I think it might be the same story, just told from his perspective. And obviously there are times when he and Louis, who is the narrator of the first book, aren't together. And so we'll see what Lestat was doing during those times. I'm very curious to see how this one goes. This is a very long series. It's like 10 plus books, I think. And I don't know if I'm actually interested in reading all of them, but I liked the first book well enough to continue. So I want to see what book 2 is like. And then if I enjoy it, I will potentially continue with the series, or I might just call it quits after book 2. We'll just have to see. Move forward 12. +500 pages. The next prompt that I landed on was to read a book that is more than 500 pages. And for this, I'm going to be reading the third book in the Game of Thrones series. I'm currently reading book 2. I still have a few days left and the rest of the month to finish it out. I don't know if I will. I don't have that much longer of it, but I don't know how much reading I'm going to get done of that. Hopefully I'll finish it actually, because I think I listened to a good chunk of it yesterday. I'm hopeful that I will finish that before the month is up, and then I can start on A Storm of Swords, which again is the third book. This is an epic fantasy series. There's an HBO television show based on it. I'm still planning on watching the show. I have not started it yet because I wanted to do comparisons of the show versus the books and see where the storylines diverge from each other, because the books are not complete, the series is not complete, but the TV show finished a few years ago. So I think there are 2 books left to come out. I could be wrong about that. Regardless, I'm going to be reading this chunker. I believe this is over 1,000 pages. This is 1,177 pages. So I'm very curious to see what happens next. This has a large cast of characters, so you're basically following multiple families from various like kingdoms, and there's sort of one throne that all of them want to be sitting on. So it's like a lot of political intrigue and maneuvering to see how, because there's like a parents' generation and then there's like a children's generation, right? And the parents are trying to get their kids on this throne. And there's like people getting arrested for treason. There's all sorts of things that are happening. So it's very interesting, but that also makes it kind of hard to follow at times, because each book so far has introduced new characters and you're not following all of the characters all of the time. Like I'll give an example. Book 1 is very heavy on Daenerys' point of view. Daenerys played by, am I not going to remember? Emilia Clarke. I thought I was going to forget her name. Emilia Clarke plays Daenerys, and I know she's a big part of the television show. I don't know how much that spoils the book, but in book 1, she's like a very prominent character. In book 2, they go to her point of view like 3 times total. And that might be an undersell, but there's just so much more from other characters' perspectives that it really like felt like you weren't getting very much time with that character. So I think that's something that I'm still getting used to, like the pacing in that sense. I will be continuing this series. I am excited to do so, but I don't know. I gave the first book 3 stars. I think I'm leaning, spoilers for my wrap up, I guess, I'm leaning towards 3 stars for book 2 as well, because like they're fine. I don't know. So you'll have to let me know. So many people love these books and I don't really get the hype at this moment. They're fine. But also I think I have like particular fantasy tastes. And I don't know that epic high fantasy from the 90s is quite my taste. Do with that information what you will. Move forward 7. YA fantasy. The third prompt that I landed on for Sorry was to read a YA fantasy, and for this I'm going to be reading Graceling by Kristen Kishore. So Graceling is the first book in a YA fantasy series, and I'll just read you the description because I'm not entirely sure what it's about. I did hear about this series. It's kind of older, I think. Yeah, it came out in 2008, and I heard about the series through Peruse Project. Her name is Reagan. She read this whole, I think it's a trilogy, and I think she read the whole thing in one weekend once during one of her weekend vlogs several years ago, but it sounded interesting enough to me that I added it to my TBR at that point. But this says, Katza has been able to kill a man with her bare hands since she was 8. She's a Graceling, one of the rare people in her land with an extreme skill. As niece of the king, she shouldn't be able to live a life of privilege, but graced as she is with killing, she is forced to work as the king's thug. She never expects to fall in love with beautiful Prince Poe, which is a ridiculous name. She never expects to learn the truth behind her grace, or the terrible secret that lies hidden far away, a secret that could destroy all 7 kingdoms with words alone. With elegant, evocative prose and a cast of unforgettable characters, debut author Kristen Kishore creates a mesmerizing world, a death-defying adventure, and a heart-racing romance that will consume you, hold you captive, and leave you wanting more. All of that to say, I'm gonna read this, and I'm excited. And I'm also just now realizing that I filmed Sorry immediately before filming this portion. And so I'm not entirely sure that my library has a copy of this available. So I will be reading this pending my library having a copy. That's something that I've not been checking recently, and it has bitten me in the butt a few times. And finally move backwards 4. Fantasy. And then the final prompt that Sorry picked for me is to read a regular fantasy, or just a fantasy without any other qualifications, I guess. For this, I'm going to be reading Night of the Animals by Bill Brown. And this is like a sci-fi fantasy, kind of sci-fi fantasy dystopia, apparently. It's set in the future, and it says there's a homeless man named Cuthbert Hanley who sets out on an astonishing quest to release the animals of the London Zoo. As a young boy, Cuthbert's mother had told him he inherited a magical ability to communicate with the animal world, a gift she called the Wonderments. Ever since his older brother's death in childhood, Cuthbert has heard voices. These maddening whispers must be the Wonderments, he believes. And recently, they have promised to reunite him with his lost brother and bring about the coming of a lord of animals, if he fulfills this curious quest. There's more description, but I'm gonna leave it at that. This sounds a little more like literary fantasy, and I know it is a standalone. I've not heard of this author before. This was his debut, and I don't know that he's written anything since, but I haven't really been keeping my eye on it because I haven't read this. So I like weird fantasy with like a magical realism. I don't like traditional magical realism, I've learned, but I like sparse fantasy, if that makes sense. Like what I was saying about how I didn't know if epic fantasy is really like my thing. Sparse fantasy, I tend to enjoy a little bit more, but there have been like epic fantasies that I've loved. So like I can like higher fantasy things, but just certain elements of high epic fantasy are not really my favorite thing. Like battles, I don't really care to read about battles. I'm much more interested in the behind the scenes of a battle, and also like maybe I'll save my thoughts for my wrap up. Because I don't want to get too far into the weeds of why I'm not loving Game of Thrones in a TBR video. But anyways, those are the 4 books that I'm planning on reading in the month of April. I know there's also a Daevabad read-along going on, and I read the first book, I think last April. So I might try to pick up book 2, which, if I can remember, I'll put the cover on the screen. The first one's City of Brass, and one of them is Empire of Gold, but that might be the 3rd book. It doesn't matter. I'm hopefully going to be reading book 2 this month. Again, that's a lot of fantasy. I used to read far more fantasy than I do right now, but I tend to need like breaks between. So we'll see if I get to that one, but I do remember really, really liking book 1, and it had a lot of interesting things going for it, and I can still remember most of what happened, I believe. So I might be continuing in that read along. I know that Magical Readathon is going on this month, so if you are participating in that, let me know in the comments down below, and I hope that goes well for you. I have decided not to participate in that this year because my stress levels are through the roof, and I don't want to overwhelm myself. You might have noticed that I have not been posting a ton on this channel. I've missed a couple weeks worth of uploads, which is kind of par for the course for me at this point, but I do plan on doing like an update video on what's going on and why that's happening. But keep your eye out for that if you want to watch it. There will also be more videos on the screen here for you to enjoy if you would like to. Like this video if you liked it. Comment down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already and you would like to see more videos from me. I do tend to try to post at least once a week, if not twice a week, but it's just sort of been what it is at this point. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye!